Hello and welcome to interest.co.nz. I'm Janae Tibshirani and today I'm back with the Retirement Commissioner, Diane Maxwell. Great
Morning.
to see you, Diane. Look, it's been a big couple of weeks for you. You've wrapped up your 3-yearly review of our retirement policy, released a set of recommendations last week, and now this week you're releasing your next set.
That's right.
Big thing, you're suggesting the age of eligibility for super be raised to 67.
Yep, so we're saying in 10 years you start a gradual raising, so nothing happens today. It affects people who are 55 or younger, and then we're talking about raising it 3 months a year, which would take 8 years to take us to 67.
Okay, so no one needs to panic that it's going to, that you're suggesting it be raised tomorrow.
No, and it mustn't be. You can't do that. You need to give people at least 10 years to prepare, to understand the change, and to get ready.
Okay. Diane, our new Prime Minister, Bill English, has left the door open to this. And Labour leader Andrew Little has said, nope, he's not keen. How are you going to convince them that this is a good idea?
Well, look, I'm a little frustrated. I think we've all got to put our big pants on this one. The public need us to have this conversation. They need a mature conversation, considered, measured, with all the data to go through it. And politicians are our leaders, and they need to lead us through this conversation, however uncomfortable it might be. So I'm really pleased that Bill English hasn't closed the door on it. I'm not expecting him to leap up and agree with me anytime soon on raising the age. What I'd like, though, is a measured dialogue across next year. I think what's really important is that we understand that if you raise the age to 67, you save about 10% of super costs. If we did it today, we won't. If we did it today, you'd save $1.6 billion. So in my view, you take that money and you invest it in people in their 50s and early 60s. And you say, what do people need in their 50s and 60s? Because for many people today, 65 is too late. So there are many people who need more from the government in their 50s and 60s anyway. If you take it to 67, you release a significant amount of money, and then you say, what do we do with those funds?
Okay, and a lot of that could be put towards helping people from 50 onwards get into employment. So, if you're a manual labourer and maybe you can't do that anymore, then you might need some help to think, okay, what are my skills and what sorts of jobs can I move into?
So you'll remember we did the ageing workforce as a whole month. We had in the end over 4,500 people tell us their experiences. Many of them said, I want to work, I want to be useful, I've got a lot to give, I want to get up in the morning and go to a job, I want to have a drink with my workmates. But I need a bit of upskilling, I need some retraining, I can't pay for that, so help me.
Okay.
So that's key. You get into your 50s, what's your next career? And for people who've been in manual labour, what could that be? Do they start teaching the trade that they've earned a living off? Do they become a teacher? Do they run a team of people who do what they used to do, but they're a leader and a manager and they manage them instead of doing it? What can you do next? But what we do know, and people said loud and clear, is I like earning money, I like being part of the workforce, I like the social engagement that comes with it, but give me something meaningful to do and pay me well for doing it. That's a fair call.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Yep.
We currently spend 5% of GDP on super.
Yeah.
The OECD spends 7% on average.
On average, yeah.
Okay, so Treasury says that by 2045, we will spend 7% of GDP. So that doesn't make it sound too bad, does it?
Well, Treasury also said in their long-term fiscal statement that if we don't make changes, net debt will blow out to 206% of GDP as a result of increased costs in super from where it is now at 25. So that's, a little alarming. There's some assumptions in there. The figures that we know is currently, super costs around 11 billion net. In 20 years, it's going to cost over 36 billion net. So in the next 20 years, we're going to see it more than triple. Now, the assumptions on that relative to GDP depend on how we think our productivity is going to be, how we think our economic growth is going to be, how we think GDP is going to grow. We know these costs are going to grow because they're fixed costs. We can quite genuinely say we know what the cost of super will be. Where we'll get to with GDP We know that an ageing population puts pressure on productivity. We know that those dependency ratios, the number of people working to the number of people retired, will impact our growth. Mm-hmm. So we're making some pretty aggressive GDP growth assumptions to get to that 7% figure.
Right, okay. So we're not too sure about Treasury's...
They're probably making the best assumptions that they can and that anybody can. But rather than look at cost of GDP, look at the actual cost of super, look at it as relative to government spend and potentially government income. The single biggest increase in cost to the government last year was New Zealand super. It went up by 700 million, followed by health, which went up by 600 million. If you combine health with increased super costs, you really have got some significant increases.
Yeah.
So I think to say, we can all argue about X% of GDP, X% increase. We can argue over that. The reality is we know we have an ageing population and we know we will have fewer people working and more people retired. There's no way around that.
Sure.
That's indisputable. We know we're going to have higher costs and we're going to be under pressure.
Diane, English is a numbers man.
Yes.
What has he said to you personally on this? He's been quite quiet publicly. What has he said to you?
Oh, look, I haven't been having long conversations with him about this. I would simply say that what I'd hope to do next year would be to engage, as I say, in a really constructive, measured way. I'm anticipating it will be slow. I don't think anybody wants to do anything in a hurry. But I'm hoping for a dialogue.
Okay. Staying on this issue of numbers, you are also suggesting that the government resumes its contribution to the New Zealand Super Fund.
Yes.
Could you explain your suggestion and also the issue around tax, because this is another big part of it.
Yeah, so the fund is taxed. And 3 years ago I said, look, if you're not going to resume contributions, then don't tax it. One or the other. However, it's still taxed. It's paid $3.5 billion and $3.3 billion in tax since contributions stopped.
And when was that?
That was 2008.
Okay.
2008, 2009, yeah. So, it's paying its fair share of tax. I think there was 1 year the fund was the biggest taxpayer in New Zealand from memory. So the thing is growing, but we need it to grow faster because in the future we are going to be drawing on the super fund to contribute to the pressure point of paying for New Zealand super.
How much do you want the government to contribute to it?
Really, really badly. How much? So in the past it's been 1 to 2% of GDP.
Yes.
I understand that they could put in lesser than that, but ideally they'd be putting in 1 to 2% of GDP. GDP today is 245 billion odd. Be great if they could be, contributing from. The idea was that they'd contribute when net debt got down to 20% of GDP. It's not there yet. Do we have to wait for that, would be my question. I know that this week and last week we saw some quite aggressive projections around what the surplus might be in the future. We might be hitting a surplus of 3, 4, 5 to 8 billion in the midterm. Fantastic. Let's try and put a couple of billion back into the super fund each year. That would be superb.
Okay, and at the very least, if we're not contributing,
for goodness sake, let's stop sucking the money out.
Sure. Okay. Another feature, we have an ageing population, but we also have an increasingly international population.
Yes, we do.
So a lot of people might be thinking to themselves, they've worked in New Zealand for all their lives paying tax. There are people coming from overseas. They need to have lived here for 10 years, been residents for 10 years, and then they can get super. You're suggesting we change this to 25 years.
So my formal recommendation will be that we extend the length of residency to 25 years. The OECD average is 26 years. Currently, you get New Zealand super if you've been in the country 10 years, 5 of which has to be after 50. And my recommendation will be that we extend that to 25 years and that will be cumulative after 20, and you can keep accumulating years after 65. So someone might be here in their 20s, leave New Zealand, come back and accumulate those 25 years across a working lifetime.
Okay, because at the moment, 10 years is the lowest period of time in the OECD.
Yeah, I think from memory, I think it is. Australia's low too, but they have asset testing.
Okay, and our migration is huge.
Migration's huge. We saw, it was 126,000 people come in last year, but that was a net 70,000 with people leaving from memory. I think in Auckland it's a third of the population or a quarter of the population were born overseas. Just trying to remember all those stats. But look, we're an incredibly diverse country. That's fantastic, actually. I love being a diverse country.
Yes.
We've got 197 ethnicities living in Auckland. That's wonderful. However, we need to be able to afford it.
Yeah.
And so if people come to New Zealand, great. But they need to understand that there'll be a 25-year term before they get super.
Sure. And I mean, that is still below the OECD average.
It's still below the
26.
OECD
So you could
average.
argue that we could be more aggressive.
Yeah, look, maybe in the future there'll be time for that. I think at the moment 25 years is where we should be, but it could be that in the future. And so I think the way it would have to work would be if you were already in New Zealand, we were held to the 10-year rule. If you come into New Zealand after the change, then it's a 25-year rule.
Sure.
So again, you don't change things on people retrospectively. You don't say you've been here 5 years. We honour the terms under which you came in. But if you come in after the change, then you're looking at 25 years.
Okay. Diane, another big change you're suggesting is the removal of the non-qualifying partner option.
Yes.
So that sounds quite confusing, but correct me if I'm wrong, but that is if I qualify for super, my partner doesn't for whatever reason, we still get the couple's amount, which is higher, which seems quite crazy, really.
It does, and I was just checking whether I had some of the stats with me on that. It's actually a very interesting area because you have people receiving New Zealand Super because their partner does. Some of those people are in their 60s, some in their 50s, some in their 40s, and some in their 20s.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Mail order brides.
Well, I don't know, Janae. You said it. You said it, not me.
So there are 13,000 non-qualifying partners. At the moment,
receiving
and this is costing
200
million a year.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
this is a huge saving, isn't it?
It's a huge saving,
but
and
this
actually,
will affect people.
It will affect people. But look, it's a very old-fashioned view, and it's based on the idea that we're all living in tidy couples, and that we retire together as couples, and that it's a sort of based on the assumption that a wife is not working and therefore she needs to get super when her husband does. I mean, it's really the sort of history of the thinking. Things have changed so much, and whether we think someone in their 40s should be getting super because their partner's a superannuitant, I don't think so.
Sure. Okay, just finally and quickly, you'd like to reform the direct deductions policy for overseas state pensions.
Yeah, this is a huge issue, and I know we've only got a short amount of time left, and actually it needs a really good airing. So let's talk about it again more. We've got to get very clear on which state pensions we are offsetting against New Zealand super. We've got to ensure that we are not offsetting ones where people have voluntarily contributed. And the problem at the moment is some schemes are getting caught up that may be administered by the state, but actually in the future we may not consider state pensions. So it's a very, very messy area. It needs to be dealt to. It's around $340 million a year and affects about 84,000 people. First things first, we think that if you're the partner of someone receiving that, the partner's super should not be offset. And we've made that recommendation very strongly and said that should come into immediate effect. And then for the individual with an overseas pension, how do we clarify whether or not it's a state pension? And that needs some serious work, and it needs some pretty immediate work.
Sure, and that is quite complicated because you're dealing with all sorts of different countries' pension schemes.
It is incredibly complicated.
Yep, and it's not just the UK anymore. It's think about.
And
I've
got to tell you, it's going to get more complicated.
Sure. Okay. Diane, thank you so much for your time.
Cool.
This is the Retirement Commissioner, Diane Maxwell,
Thanks,
and I'm Janae Tibshirani from interest.co.nz.